What would drive a prince to crawl back to the very throne he abandoned, just to keep the lights on in Montecito? The morning fog hadn't yet lifted over Montecito when whispers started drifting across the Atlantic like a chilling draft through the gates of Buckingham Palace. Not from the usual tabloids or anonymous sources feeding the endless appetite for scandal, but from somewhere deeper, more desperate. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, once second in line to the throne, now an estranged figure in California's gilded exile, had reportedly reached out to King Charles III. Not with reconciliation in mind, not to seek forgiveness or rekindle broken bonds. No, this time, it was something else entirely. Something far less noble. He was asking for a job. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In a world where former royals rub shoulders with billionaires and stream their private lives on platforms hungry for content, the notion of Harry begging his estranged father for even a temporary royal role sent shockwaves through every level of British society. What happened to the couple who once stood under the bright California sun promising reinvention, freedom, and the ability to tell their truth? Why would Meghan Markle, the woman once hailed as a global icon of independence, allegedly urge her husband to crawl back to the very institution she fought so hard to escape? This isn't just a story about desperation. This is a story about money, power, illusion, and the silent unraveling of a couple who bet everything on a dream that may now be disintegrating beneath their feet. The signs were all there, hiding in plain sight. Opulent photo shoots for magazines no longer translating into brand deals. Documentary specials that drew more criticism than acclaim. A Spotify deal killed before its time, with public commentary from the company's top brass calling them grifters. Netflix, once the golden goose, growing hesitant. Archewell, the philanthropic empire they promised to build, seeing more headlines about dysfunction than impact. And behind the curtain, sources from within their Montecito circle began leaking details to press, some anonymously, others boldly. The picture that emerged was far from the curated Instagram fairy tale. It was chaos. It was financial ruin, or at the very least, the looming specter of it. But where did it all begin? The cracks began to show soon after their historic departure from the royal family in 2020. Dubbed Megxit by the media, the move was pitched as a fresh start, a bold reimagining of what royal service could look like in the 21st century. But freedom, as it turns out, comes with a price. A very steep one. Security, housing, legal representation, PR, personal staff, it all adds up. And when you no longer have the sovereign grant footing the bill or royal protocol shielding you from scrutiny, the cost becomes painfully real. Meghan had promised reinvention. Hollywood doors would open. Political circles would embrace her. She would redefine what it meant to be a duchess on her own terms. But the reality was much messier. Despite a flurry of initial attention, her projects quickly lost steam. A podcast that failed to sustain momentum. A production deal with Netflix producing limited fruit. A lifestyle brand teased and then abandoned. Even her attempts to build political clout in the U.S. stalled, facing skepticism from all sides of the aisle. Behind the scenes, staff turnover at Archewell soared. Donors began pulling back. Brand partners who once eagerly associated themselves with the Sussex name became cautious, wary of controversy and inconsistency. Inside sources described Archewell meetings as chaotic and reactive. One insider claimed, "There's no strategy, just scramble." While Meghan tried to maintain her image through curated public appearances and carefully staged interviews, the financial strain reportedly began bleeding into their personal life. And Harry, for all his resistance to returning to the royal fold, began feeling the weight of his decisions. He had given up everything, titles, military honors, family ties, for a new life. And that life was starting to feel unsustainable. That's when the desperation kicked in. Insiders now say that Meghan, realizing how far they had fallen from their projected future, urged Harry to do the unthinkable, go back to his father, hat in hand. Not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to negotiate. The ask? A temporary role within the monarchy. Something small, perhaps symbolic, but enough to reinstate public legitimacy and attract the financial partnerships they so desperately needed. The reaction from King Charles, as you can imagine, was anything but sympathetic. Sources close to the palace claim the king was blindsided. After years of personal attacks, a tell-all memoir that laid bare family secrets, in media interviews that painted him as emotionally distant and complicit in royal racism. Charles had hardened. One aide described his response as icily formal. Another said the king laughed before dismissing the request outright. But Harry's alleged plea raises more questions than answers. Why now? And why such a humiliating request after years of distancing from the monarchy? The answer lies in the Sussex brand's erosion. Harry and Meghan are no longer the fairy tale exiles they once were. They are now perceived, fairly or unfairly, as privileged grifters who weaponize their trauma for clicks and cash. Even their most ardent supporters are asking questions. What happened to the projects they promised? What impact has Archewell actually made? Where's the transparency? And at the heart of this storm is the increasingly toxic perception that Harry has become a puppet, his strings pulled not by public duty or private conviction, but by a woman desperate to preserve the illusion of relevance. This brings us to the most chilling aspect of this entire saga, the internal decay, not just of their public image, but of their personal lives. Multiple sources have reported rising tensions inside their marriage. One former aide noted, "They're shouting now. Blame. Isolation. They rarely agree on next steps." Another claimed Harry has become a ghost inside his own home, retreating further into solitude while Meghan tries to salvage what's left. And then came the call. A direct line to King Charles through a trusted intermediary. Not a formal request, but a plea. Is there any role, any title, any symbolic position Harry could assume to reattach himself to the crown? What makes this revelation so staggering is not just the act itself, but the implications. A man who once swore he would never return, now asking for a temporary pass back inside the gates. It's an act of survival cloaked in dignity, or at least an attempt at one. King Charles, for his part, is reportedly holding firm. The firm, too. Royal advisors are said to be united in their opposition to granting the Sussexes any foothold. They made their choice, one insider said. Now they live with it. But is that really the end of it? History tells us that the monarchy rarely makes clean breaks. Even Edward VIII, the last royal exile of this scale, lingered in the shadows for decades, courted, rejected, and occasionally weaponized by the institution he abandoned. Could Harry, too, become a pawn in a much larger game? As of now, Meghan and Harry remain in California. But the leaks keep coming. The tone of their public statements has shifted, from triumphant to careful, from bold to vague. Meghan, once overflowing with big ideas and bigger statements, now speaks less and posts even less. Her silence speaks volumes. This story is not just about two people losing their financial footing. It is about identity, pride, survival, and the danger of believing that image alone can replace substance. It is about a family torn apart not just by tradition or trauma, but by money. And that's where we begin. Because what follows is a layered, unfiltered look at how the fairy tale fell apart, chapter by chapter, decision by decision. How the Sussex brand went from global admiration to desperate rebranding. How Meghan Markle, the self-styled queen of reinvention, may have pushed Prince Harry into the one thing he swore he'd never do: go back. Not for love, not for healing, but for a paycheck. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from royal duties in early 2020, the announcement was shrouded in confidence and ambition. The world watched as the couple proclaimed their desire to become financially independent, to carve out a new path away from the constraints of the firm. On paper, it looked like a revolutionary idea. Two of the world's most recognizable faces, untethered from palace bureaucracy, free to pursue media, activism, philanthropy, and commerce on their own terms. What could possibly go wrong? As it turns out, nearly everything. The couple's early post-Megxit days were filled with high hopes and Hollywood enthusiasm. They inked deals that made global headlines, a multi-year agreement with Netflix estimated at $100 million, a Spotify podcast partnership, and various speaking engagements worth upwards of $1 million per event. To the outside world, it appeared they had landed on their feet in style. Lavish drone shots of their sprawling Montecito mansion quickly became symbols of their success. But behind the Instagram filters and exclusive interviews, financial realities were far more precarious than anyone dared admit. The first public sign that something was amiss came quietly, almost buried in press reports. It was a story about Archewell Audio, the podcast arm of their charitable and creative ventures. The couple's Spotify deal, initially celebrated as a bold leap into the podcasting world, began raising eyebrows when only one full-length episode surfaced over the course of more than a year. Spotify insiders began to speak anonymously to the press, with one former producer claiming the Sussexes were difficult to work with and lacked direction. The content wasn't matching the hype. Behind closed doors, negotiations grew tense. Eventually, the deal was terminated. No fanfare. No dramatic goodbye. Just silence and a subtle corporate distancing. Then came the comment from a Spotify executive that changed everything. "We wish them the best of luck in their future endeavors." It was a diplomatic death sentence in media language, polite, but final. It didn't stop there. Another exec, speaking less diplomatically, referred to the couple as grifters. The insult landed like a punch to the gut and instantly trended worldwide. For a couple who had built their brand around authenticity, emotional truth, and social justice, being labeled grifters by a Fortune 500 company was more than a reputational hit. It was a financial red flag. Next came Archwell Productions, the Netflix arm of their media efforts. The streamer had placed significant trust in the Sussexes, hoping their celebrity, royal lineage, and unique story would generate high-quality, award-winning content. But after a few scattered ideas, including the Harry and Meghan docuseries and a now-canceled animated series about a girl inspired by influential women in history, Netflix seemed to lose interest. Internally, some at the company allegedly questioned the long-term value of their deal. Were they really producers? Or just subjects? Without compelling new ideas or fresh content, the Sussexes risked becoming expensive placeholders. And then there's the real estate. Their Montecito estate, valued at over $14 million, stands as both a symbol of their ambition and a potential financial albatross. The property, with its palatial gardens, tennis courts, and expansive guest quarters, carries enormous upkeep costs. Property taxes alone are astronomical. Add in around-the-clock security detail, household staff, and utilities, and it's easy to see how monthly costs could reach well into the six figures. For a couple without consistent income streams, even a mansion can start to feel like a burden. Financial experts who track celebrity assets and expenditures have estimated that the Sussexes' lifestyle could cost upwards of $3 to $5 million annually, conservatively. And that's without factoring in legal fees, private jet travel, or donations to charity, a requirement they pledged to uphold through their Archwell Foundation. Despite publicized efforts to support various causes, scrutiny into Archwell's finances revealed a less-than-stellar showing. One year, tax documents showed that the foundation had raised under $2 million and distributed far less in actual grants. While charitable organizations often take time to grow, critics argued that Archwell lacked transparency and clear goals. Meanwhile, the lawsuits kept coming. Meghan's long-standing case against the Mail on Sunday, which she eventually won, cost significant legal fees. Prince Harry's ongoing litigation against the British press and his recent skirmishes with the Home Office over taxpayer-funded security have all required aggressive and expensive legal representation. Multiple lawsuits mean multiple law firms, and those firms don't work pro bono. Add to this the most quietly devastating expense of all, reputation management. PR firms, image consultants, social media handlers, and crisis managers are on permanent retainer. The couple's image, once invincible, has suffered bruises from 1,000 small cuts. Each new headline, some real, some exaggerated, requires spin, damage control, and sometimes suppression. Industry insiders estimate that high-profile public figures like Meghan and Harry spend anywhere between $50,000 and $250,000 per month on image control alone, depending on how intense the news cycle is. As the financial squeeze intensified, subtle changes began surfacing. Meghan, once a fixture at high-fashion events, started making fewer appearances. Their joint ventures became more sporadic, their branding more confused. Were they filmmakers, activists, philanthropists, or influencers? The public couldn't tell, and neither could their corporate backers. One former associate put it bluntly. They tried to do everything at once and ended up doing nothing well. Perhaps the most glaring sign of their financial fragility was their failure to lock down new major partnerships after the Spotify debacle. For months, there were whispers of new brand launches, product lines, or even a foray into wellness. But nothing materialized. The silence grew louder. Former business allies began ghosting them. Invitations dried up. One anonymous Hollywood agent remarked, "They've become high risk. Brands don't want the drama, and the audience just isn't as charmed anymore." So why does this all matter? Because behind the glamour, the Sussexes' entire financial model depended on maintaining a certain level of public appeal and high-profile relevance. Unlike traditional celebrities who can lean on past film or music royalties, Harry and Meghan's income was speculative, built on their story, their brand, and their influence. When that influence started to wane, so did the checks. By the time whispers began that Harry was reaching back out to King Charles, it was already too late to hide the cracks. The attempt to secure even a temporary royal role wasn't just a PR stunt. It was a lifeline, a Hail Mary move in a high-stakes financial crisis. By reconnecting with the monarchy, even symbolically, they hoped to rebrand themselves as legitimate global figures again, perhaps even regain access to resources, protection, or at the very least, credibility. What's tragic is that this desperation was once unthinkable. When they left the UK, they were at the peak of global sympathy and interest. The Oprah interview had set the world ablaze. Meghan's revelations of suicidal thoughts and royal indifference struck a nerve across demographics. But goodwill is not infinite. Eventually, emotion gives way to expectation. And the public began asking, what are they doing now? The answer, it seems, was scrambling. Behind closed doors, insiders described Harry as deeply unsettled, cut off from his friends, family, and once reliable sources of guidance. Meghan, meanwhile, reportedly became more controlling, micromanaging appearances, and vetting potential opportunities with increasing intensity. Their inner circle began to shrink. People who once swore loyalty started leaking details. The narrative spun out of control. Now, they face an impossible task, rebuilding a brand while simultaneously begging for validation from the very institution they vilified. Harry's appeal to King Charles, no matter how discreet or indirect, confirms what many had long suspected. They need the monarchy more than they ever admitted. And here's the brutal irony. Had they maintained even a shred of royal connection, an honorary role, a family photo op, a gesture of respect, they might have preserved the very image they now seek to reclaim. But the bridges were not just burned. They were obliterated. Now the cracks in the glamour are fully exposed. The Sussex fairy tale has become a cautionary tale. Fame, fortune, and freedom come at a cost. And for Harry and Meghan, the bill is due. When Meghan Markle first set her sights on California, it wasn't just about escaping the constraints of royal life. It was a return to her roots, both literally and symbolically. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Meghan wasn't a stranger to the allure of Hollywood. Long before she became the Duchess of Sussex, she had walked the red carpets, studied scripts, waited tables, and taken bit parts. She was an actress on the rise, best known for her role as Rachel Zane in the legal drama Suits. But she had greater aspirations. Her dream was never just to perform, it was to belong at the top of the entertainment hierarchy. When she and Prince Harry stepped back from royal duties, there was a sense among their supporters that Meghan would finally get the spotlight she deserved on her own terms. But as time has shown, not all dreams survive the brutal, bottom-line world of Hollywood. Especially not when fame outpaces substance and buzz fades before projects materialize. The initial reception to the couple's pivot to entertainment was promising. Media giants scrambled to sign them. Netflix offered a lucrative deal estimated to be worth close to $100 million. Spotify welcomed them with open arms. Hollywood PR firms predicted a Meghan Markle media empire. She was going to be the next Oprah, the next Gwyneth, the next global female entrepreneur to conquer industries from content to lifestyle to politics. But within just a few short years, those dreams began to unravel. To understand the collapse, one must first understand Meghan's strategy. She wasn't interested in taking traditional acting roles. She wanted power behind the camera. She wanted to produce. She wanted to own her narrative, shape the stories, and control the optics. The deal with Netflix wasn't just for docuseries like Harry and Meghan, but for scripted content, animation, and documentaries that would reflect her values: female empowerment, social justice, racial identity, motherhood. These were noble ambitions, and in theory, Hollywood would welcome them. But theory and reality rarely coexist in the entertainment industry. Meghan had the fame, yes, but fame isn't enough. Hollywood runs on metrics: viewership, critical response, development timelines, and return on investment. And Meghan's projects quickly found themselves in a spiral of delays, confusion, and underperformance. Her first major production was Pearl, an animated children's series she was co-creating about a young girl inspired by notable women in history. It was a safe concept, with positive messaging and educational value. But Netflix abruptly dropped it in 2022 as part of broader content cutbacks, citing internal restructuring. Insiders, however, whispered that the real reason had more to do with creative stagnation. Meghan, despite her passion, lacked the experience to shepherd a series from pitch to production. Meetings stalled. Storylines were constantly rewritten. Animation studios hesitated to commit without clearer guidance. Eventually, the project fizzled. That was the first major blow, and it exposed a crucial truth. Meghan's reach had exceeded her grasp. Producing television requires not just vision, but a team of seasoned professionals who can execute that vision. Meghan was not yet established in those circles. She had enthusiasm, celebrity, and cultural cachet, but she lacked the deep industry relationships that power producers rely on to make things happen. And as deadlines slipped and budgets ballooned, those partners became increasingly reluctant to bid on her ideas. Then came the Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan. This was supposed to be the crown jewel of their media efforts, a powerful, raw, and intimate portrait of their lives post-royal exit. Directed by Liz Garbus, a respected filmmaker, the series did generate headlines and some initial viewership. But it also drew criticism. Royalists dismissed it as propaganda. Critics said it lacked depth and focused too heavily on grievances. Viewers were left unsure of its purpose. Was it a love story, a redemption arc, or a smear campaign? Netflix execs reportedly expressed disappointment in its performance relative to the investment. The show didn't trend globally for long. There was no awards buzz. No follow-up season was announced. Most damning of all, the Sussexes didn't appear to have another project ready in the pipeline to build on the momentum. For an industry that lives by the rule, what's next? That silence was deafening. Meanwhile, Meghan's podcast Archetypes, launched under her Spotify deal, followed a similar trajectory. The premise, deconstructing stereotypes women face, was timely and relevant. Her guests included Serena Williams, Mariah Carey, and other prominent voices. But behind the scenes, Spotify reportedly grew frustrated with delays and lack of content. Only 12 episodes were produced over several months, despite the massive budget. Meghan was accused of being overly controlling, demanding excessive rewrites and edits, and insisting on narrative framing that felt scripted rather than spontaneous. The final straw came in 2023 when Spotify officially ended the partnership. The announcement was businesslike, but off-the-record comments painted a different picture. Meghan's team was difficult. Her podcast didn't deliver the listenership expected. And for a platform that had invested millions, the return simply wasn't there. In the entertainment world, those kinds of comments travel fast. Meghan was no longer seen as a rising star in media circles. She was now seen as high-maintenance, unproven, and worse, a reputational risk. Once you're on that list in Hollywood, the doors that once opened freely start to close quietly. She tried pivoting. There were rumors of a new lifestyle brand, a blog relaunch, even a potential beauty line. But none materialized. The rumored return of the Tick, her former wellness and lifestyle site, was teased but never launched. Part of the problem was oversaturation. The market is flooded with celebrity brands, and investors are wary of ventures tied to individuals with unstable public images. With each misstep, Meghan's name lost value, not just in public perception but in marketability. Her attempts to secure a spot in the U.S. political space also stalled. After her letter to Congress about paid family leave went viral, some thought she might make the jump to public office. But political insiders reportedly dismissed the idea. Her mixed reputation, royal baggage, and lack of political experience made her an impractical candidate. The excitement faded as quickly as it emerged. Even charity events, once a staple of her image, began showing signs of strain. Her appearances became less frequent. Coverage more muted. Invitations to top-tier galas and fundraisers grew scarce. It wasn't personal, insiders claimed, it was just branding. Meghan was seen as unpredictable. And in elite philanthropy circles, unpredictability is poison. Meanwhile, her Hollywood relationships began to erode. Oprah Winfrey, once her biggest media champion, noticeably distanced herself. Other celebrities who had once publicly praised her grew quieter. The glitz and glamour of Montecito were no longer enough to maintain her position in the Hollywood ecosystem. All of this left Meghan in a dangerous place. She was now stuck between two worlds, no longer royal enough for the monarchy, but not quite successful enough for Hollywood. She couldn't return to acting. She had burned too many bridges with the British press to re-enter that space. And in California, she was no longer the fresh face with a royal fairy tale. She was just another celebrity trying to stay relevant in an industry that moves fast and forgets faster. Perhaps the most tragic part is that Meghan's collapse wasn't inevitable. Had she surrounded herself with experienced producers and strategic advisors instead of yes-men, things might have been different. Had she focused on one project at a time instead of launching multiple ventures at once, she might have built something sustainable. But in her ambition to dominate the space quickly, broadly, loudly, she stretched too thin. Now, she's left watching from the sidelines as other women in her space, Michelle Obama, Reese Witherspoon, Amal Clooney, flourish with authenticity and strategic vision. Meghan once stood poised to join their ranks. Now she is seen as a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition outpaces discipline. The collapse of her Hollywood ambitions isn't just a career setback. It's a public unmasking of a narrative that was carefully cultivated but ultimately lacked depth. The audience wanted substance, but what they got was style. They wanted leadership, but what they got was grievance. They wanted evolution, but what they saw was regression. Today, the Meghan Markle brand is in free fall. And as her Hollywood dreams crumble, the consequences are felt far beyond Montecito. They ripple into her marriage, her family, her public identity. The very foundation of her life outside the royal family was built on the belief that she could rise higher in America than she ever could in the UK. That belief is now in question. And so, with doors closing in Hollywood and her public image diminished, Meghan is left with few options. Which is why many insiders believe she turned to the one avenue she thought she'd never need again, the monarchy. Not as a partner, but as a safety net. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle launched the Archewell Foundation in 2020, it was meant to symbolize a new chapter, one that distanced them from the British monarchy while embracing causes they claimed were close to their hearts: compassion, community, equity, and mental wellness. The name itself, a blend of Archie Greek for source of action, and well, was positioned as a reflection of deep-rooted purpose. To many, it seemed like a promising next step for two figures eager to prove they could serve outside the confines of Buckingham Palace. But beneath the press releases and lofty mission statements, Archewell began to show signs of something troubling: a lack of direction, poor leadership, inconsistent execution, and internal dysfunction that ultimately led to its quiet and humiliating collapse. What was meant to become a world-shaping philanthropic vehicle instead became a cautionary tale, one that echoed the broader unraveling of the Sussex brand. In the beginning, Archewell's launch was shrouded in delays. After Harry and Meghan's abrupt royal departure, the foundation's original name, Sussex Royal, was quickly dropped due to pressure from the Queen's advisors, who insisted they could not profit off their royal titles after stepping back from official duties. That early confrontation set a tone of tension and adjustment that would carry through much of the foundation's existence. When Archewell finally launched publicly in late 2020, the rollout was unusually muted for such a high-profile couple. A simple website with a vague mission and abstract commitments greeted visitors. There were no programs immediately launched, no fundraising campaigns, and no public board of directors listed. For a foundation claiming global ambition, the start was curiously underwhelming. Critics were quick to point out the contrast between Meghan and Harry's massive media presence and the lack of substance behind their supposed philanthropic efforts. Internally, things were even less stable. Over the first 2 years of Archewell's operation, multiple key staff members departed, some quietly, others with media attention. Catherine St. Laurent, the former chief of staff and executive director of Archewell, left after just 11 months. Her departure sent a wave of speculation through media circles. St. Laurent, who had previously worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, was highly respected and seen as someone capable of professionalizing Archewell. Her sudden exit raised eyebrows. Later, it would be reported that Archewell had gone through at least 5 major staffing changes in less than 2 years. A revolving door at the executive level is rarely a sign of a well-functioning operation. Insiders described a culture of chaos behind the scenes, unclear directives, shifting priorities, and an absence of accountability. According to one former employee who spoke under condition of anonymity, Archewell lacked a basic operating structure. There was no defined plan for how to measure impact. Goals would change weekly. Meghan was hyper-involved in every aesthetic decision, but less available when it came to operational details, the source claimed. This problem extended beyond management. Archewell's actual philanthropic output remained limited. While the couple announced partnerships with a handful of organizations, including World Central Kitchen and the Aspen Institute, tangible deliverables were few and far between. Some press releases outlined future intentions, like building community relief centers or producing studies on misinformation, but follow-through was often delayed or unclear. By the end of its second year, Archwell had donated relatively small sums compared to other high-profile philanthropic entities. Tax filings revealed that in 2021, the foundation gave less than $300,000 in grants, despite the massive media attention it had received. Even worse, the costs of running Archwell, including salaries, marketing, and administrative expenses, often outweighed the actual funds distributed to charity. The numbers weren't just disappointing, they were embarrassing. And in the social impact world, numbers matter. Potential donors began stepping away. There was no clear path for scalability. Large-scale philanthropic ventures require momentum, trust, and transparency. Archwell had none of these. Instead, it had scandal, disorganization, and unmet expectations. The damage wasn't just reputational, it was existential. Foundations survive by attracting sustained support. That support comes from individuals, corporations, and institutional partners who believe in the mission, the leadership, and the brand. But Archwell's brand was intrinsically tied to Harry and Meghan, and by 2023, their names were more polarizing than ever. Media coverage of Archwell increasingly focused on its failures rather than its intentions. Articles pointed to contradictions, Harry speaking on mental health while publicly bashing his family, Meghan advocating for compassion while ghosting former staff and friends. The couple promising to fight misinformation while aligning with celebrity gossip outlets. The narrative of hypocrisy was difficult to shake. Even supporters began to question whether the couple truly understood what it meant to build a sustainable, effective nonprofit. In 2024, Archwell's public activity dwindled further. No major new initiatives were launched. Social media presence fell quiet. Updates to their website slowed. It appeared the foundation was being deprioritized, if not fully abandoned. Speculation grew. Were they shifting focus to other ventures? Were financial issues forcing them to scale down? Or had Archwell simply run out of steam? Behind the scenes, more staff exits occurred. And with each departure, more stories leaked. Several former staffers reported that Archwell had become a toxic workplace. Complaints ranged from poor communication and unrealistic expectations to sudden firings and legal threats against whistleblowers. One former assistant described the environment as burnout in slow motion. The final blow came when internal documents were quietly leaked to a financial watchdog group. These documents allegedly showed that Archwell had spent over 60% of its operating budget on consultants and private branding firms, many of which had ties to Meghan's personal circle. The backlash was immediate. Critics labeled Archwell as a vanity project disguised as philanthropy. Journalists dug deeper. Questions emerged about tax compliance, conflict of interest, and inflated valuations of in-kind services. The Sussex's team scrambled to do damage control. A short statement was released reaffirming their commitment to charitable work and hinting at a strategic restructuring of Archwell's operations. But the damage was done. Within weeks, their few remaining partners began publicly distancing themselves. The World Central Kitchen removed their logo from a joint project page. The Aspen Institute declined to renew an initiative. Quietly, subtly, Archwell was being abandoned by the very people it needed to survive. Perhaps the most telling sign of Archwell's collapse was Meghan and Harry's silence. Once so eager to promote their foundation, they now barely mentioned it in public. In interviews, they focused more on personal struggles and lifestyle projects than charity. Even their websites began directing traffic to individual endeavors rather than joint philanthropic efforts. And so, Archwell, once the flagship of the post-royal era, became a shell, a domain name, a relic of grand ambition undone by poor execution and overexposure. It didn't fail because the public lost interest. It failed because the couple never truly invested in the hard, unglamorous work that sustains real charitable impact. The lesson here is not just about Archwell. It's about identity. The Sussexes believed that star power alone could build institutions, that headlines could replace hard infrastructure, that a few Instagram-ready photos could replace metrics and governance. But in the real world of philanthropy, where lives are at stake and resources must be stewarded responsibly, that illusion shattered quickly. Archwell's collapse is not just a footnote in Harry and Meghan's story, it's a central chapter. It proves that intention without follow-through is meaningless, that charisma cannot replace commitment, and that when you promise the world, you better be ready to deliver it, one receipt at a time. In the dazzling aftermath of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's royal departure, headlines swirled with numbers that sparked envy and admiration alike. The couple was reportedly worth tens of millions. Deals were flying in from Netflix, Spotify, publishers, and speaking circuits. Their Archwell Foundation received attention as a philanthropic vehicle, and Harry's memoir Spare was predicted to dominate book sales globally. From the outside, it looked like the Sussexes had struck gold. Financial independence? Achieved. Life beyond the palace? Prosperous. But as time has passed, a more sobering reality has emerged, one punctuated by an increasingly uncomfortable question. Where did all that money go? Initial estimates suggested the couple would generate over $100 million in income within their first 2 years post-Megxit. The Netflix deal alone was pegged at roughly $100 million, though that number was contingent on deliverables and performance. Their Spotify agreement was reportedly worth $20 million. Book advances, brand partnerships, and event appearance fees were estimated to add another $5 to $10 million to their coffers. Add in the royalties from Spare, Meghan's children's book The Bench, and a deal with a talent agency, and you begin to understand why the world assumed the Sussexes had achieved a level of untouchable financial security. But financial experts tracking public information began noticing something odd. While the income was high, the expenditures were just as staggering, and in some cases, entirely disproportionate to the couple's output. Let's begin with their Montecito estate. Purchased for $14.65 million in 2020, the mansion was a statement piece. 11 bedrooms, 16 bathrooms, a rose garden, tennis courts, a tea house, a library, and a pool. It wasn't just a home, it was a declaration. But the true cost of owning such a property doesn't stop at the purchase price. Property taxes in Santa Barbara County are estimated at over $150,000 annually. Maintenance of the grounds, security staff, insurance, and utility bills easily reach upwards of $300,000 a year. Add in renovations, luxury furniture, and privacy installations, and that home is now consuming a multi-million-dollar annual chunk of their income. Then there's personal security. After stepping away from royal life, the Sussexes lost access to taxpayer-funded protection. In the U.S., they have had to hire their own team of elite former military personnel, cybersecurity experts, drivers, and logistical planners. Reports estimate that 24/7 security for a high-profile couple in a publicized location like Montecito could cost $2 to $4 million annually. That figure includes not just personnel but armored vehicles, surveillance systems, and rotation schedules to avoid burnout among security staff. Legal fees form another massive drain. Since their split from the royal family, Harry and Meghan have been involved in a slew of lawsuits. Meghan's battle with the Mail on Sunday alone cost an estimated $2 million in legal bills. Harry's legal crusade against the British press, the Home Office, and various tabloid publishers involves some of the most expensive law firms in London. Even when legal victories are achieved, they rarely reimburse the full cost. Litigation at this level isn't just expensive, it's perpetual. Sources say legal costs now account for nearly 15% of the couple's annual spending. Public relations is another significant and often underestimated expenditure. Managing the Sussexes brand requires a team of consultants, crisis managers, social media experts, media advisors, and strategists. After facing major reputational hits from public backlash, failed business deals, and contradictory interviews, they reportedly expanded their PR reach. Firms in New York, Los Angeles, and even London have been contracted at various times. These aren't casual agencies. Some charge 6 figures per month. Between PR retainers and social media management, insiders estimate the couple spends at least $1 million annually trying to control their public narrative. Then there's staff. The couple maintains a personal team that includes nannies, household managers, chefs, stylists, assistants, and business managers. In Montecito, such professionals come at premium rates. Household employees alone could cost between $500,000 to $1 million annually, especially with the Sussexes' demands for privacy, discretion, and loyalty. And this figure doesn't even include the foundation staff or media production teams hired for short-term projects. With these ongoing expenses, it becomes clear that their revenue streams must remain consistent and high-yielding. But that's where the collapse begins. Spotify, after paying them a reported $20 million, terminated the contract due to underperformance. Meghan produced only one season of Archetypes, and there was significant production assistance. Harry, for his part, never released a solo podcast despite the promise of one. No renewal. No second chance. No additional payments. Netflix, though still technically in partnership with the couple, has scaled back expectations. After Harry and Meghan and the release of Heart of Invictus, no new projects have been publicly greenlit. According to multiple media insiders, Netflix was dissatisfied with the return on investment. While the docuseries had initial success, it did not have lasting cultural or commercial impact. Without fresh content, their projected payouts are stalled or possibly canceled altogether. Meanwhile, Meghan's lifestyle brand, once rumored to be in development, has produced no products, no endorsements, no content. The anticipated relaunch of her old blog, The Tig, has been pushed back indefinitely, if not scrapped. Reports indicate she was in talks with investors and partners for various ventures, but many of those conversations stalled after their public image took repeated hits. As for Harry's memoir Spare, it generated massive global headlines and sold well during its launch. However, revenue from book sales, while significant in the short term, is not an annuity. Publishing contracts often front-load payments in advances, which are non-recurring. The money from Spare, believed to be in the range of $20 million, was likely distributed in installments and largely taxed. A portion also reportedly went to charitable causes, reducing the net personal benefit. Adding to the uncertainty is the ambiguity surrounding Archewell's financial structure. The foundation's filings suggest that a sizable portion of its funding came not from outside donors, but from Harry and Meghan themselves, raising the question of whether some of their Netflix or publishing earnings were being funneled into Archewell to sustain its operations. If so, it further shrinks their liquid reserves. Another financial mystery surrounds their taxes. Operating a business in the U.S. at their scale requires careful structuring. Between California state taxes, federal income taxes, and international earnings, like UK royalties and speaking fees abroad, the Sussexes may be facing some of the highest personal tax rates possible. Tax lawyers with experience in cross-border earnings estimate that the couple loses between 40 to 50% of their income to taxes alone, depending on how it's structured. Luxury travel, another quiet expense, further drains resources. Private jets, security advance teams, international accommodations, and logistics for even one global trip can exceed $250,000. Multiply that by a dozen events per year, and you're looking at several million spent just to maintain the image of a global power couple. Now, when one takes all of this into account, the original $100 million narrative becomes less impressive and far more precarious. What once seemed like generational wealth is actually a volatile, high-maintenance lifestyle funded by inconsistent projects and an increasingly damaged brand. And the question isn't just where the money went, it's how much is left. Financial advisors suggest the Sussexes likely have less than 20% of their reported earnings in liquid assets, meaning most of their net worth is tied up in property and non-transferable contracts. In other words, their wealth is largely theoretical. If they had to scale back tomorrow, sell the house, cut the staff, halt operations, they'd walk away with far less than the headlines ever implied. And herein lies the crisis. They cannot downsize without signaling failure. They cannot abandon Montecito without inviting questions. They cannot cancel Archewell without public humiliation. So they maintain the facade at great cost. The Sussex brand requires constant feeding. But with so many of their original income streams drying up, the well is not just low, it may be bone dry. Which brings us full circle to Harry's alleged plea to King Charles for a temporary royal role. Because it's not just about honor, or identity, or reconciliation. It's about solvency. A formal royal position, even a ceremonial one, could open doors. It could allow them to attach themselves once again to the infrastructure of the firm. It could restore trust among brand partners. It could attract new investors. But most importantly, it could keep the money flowing. Until now, the Sussexes have fought to separate themselves from the crown. Now, they may need it to survive. The fairy tale was expensive. The independence even more so. And as the numbers continue to dry up, the once dazzling dream of a Hollywood royal empire is giving way to something far more humbling. The financial reality of two people caught between ambition and arithmetic. Every public figure knows that image is not built alone. Behind every successful brand, especially one as intricately curated as Meghan Markle's, there's a tight-knit inner circle, a team of loyalists and confidants who protect, advise, and defend. For years, Meghan projected the aura of a woman surrounded by trusted allies. Longtime friends, hand-picked professionals, and strategic thinkers who helped position her as a modern feminist icon and fearless truth-teller. But what happens when that circle starts to fray? What does it mean when the people once closest to her, many of whom defended her publicly, begin to walk away? As the couple's post-royal journey began faltering under scrutiny, one trend became increasingly impossible to ignore. Meghan's inner circle was shrinking. Not quietly, not subtly, but in sharp, headline-grabbing exits that painted a picture of disorder, disillusionment, and betrayal. What started as minor staffing changes escalated into full-blown upheaval. Now, even those who once stood firmly in Meghan's corner are speaking out or simply disappearing altogether. One of the earliest and most telling exits was that of Catherine St. Laurent, who served as the executive director of the Archewell Foundation. Brought in with an impressive resume from her time at the Gates Foundation, St. Laurent was described as a professional powerhouse, someone who could bring structure, purpose, and credibility to Meghan and Harry's philanthropic ambitions. But within just 11 months, she was gone. No scandal, no interview, just a brief press statement announcing she would transition to an advisory role. That advisory role, insiders later confirmed, never materialized. St. Laurent's departure marked a turning point. It wasn't just the loss of an executive. It was a flashing red signal that Archewell, and by extension, Meghan's larger operation, was in trouble. From there, the exits came fast and frequently. Meghan's UK-based press secretary, Jason Knopf, left after playing a pivotal role in the infamous Oprah interview timeline and later testified against Meghan in her lawsuit against the Mail on Sunday. His decision to speak out, even in a limited legal context, stunned royal watchers and suggested internal tensions deeper than previously known. But it wasn't just staff. Close personal friends, people who had once attended her wedding, who had defended her against the press, who had shared vacation homes and Instagram likes, began to vanish from public association. One of the most symbolic losses was Jessica Mulroney, a Canadian stylist and Meghan's longtime best friend. The two had been inseparable during Meghan's Suits days. Mulroney was seen as Meghan's fashion muse, public supporter, and social equal. But in 2020, following a racially charged social media controversy involving Mulroney, Meghan notably distanced herself. The silence between the two became deafening. Rumors swirled that Meghan had refused to stand by her longtime friend, viewing the incident as a threat to her brand. Then came the real bombshells. Several of Meghan's former staffers in the UK began speaking to reporters off the record, many using pseudonyms or anonymous titles like the Sussex Survivors Club. Their accusations painted a grim picture of Meghan's behavior behind closed doors, demanding, dismissive, emotionally volatile, and obsessively controlling. One aide described emotional cruelty and manipulation, while another claimed Meghan would reduce staff to tears. Buckingham Palace, which had initially been cautious in addressing these reports, eventually launched an internal HR inquiry, an unprecedented move that signaled just how serious the allegations had become. Meghan's defenders attempted to frame the exodus as typical high turnover in high-pressure environments. But that explanation quickly fell apart when more departures followed. Hollywood advisors who had signed on to shape her media career pulled back. A Netflix development executive who worked briefly with Archewell's production team reportedly walked away after a breakdown in creative collaboration. Former assistants leaked stories of last-minute script rewrites, constant reshoots, and a refusal to accept constructive criticism. The exodus extended to Meghan's U.S. public relations strategy. Her relationship with Sunshine Sachs, the once powerful PR firm that managed her image during the early Megxit phase, ended unexpectedly. Sunshine Sachs had helped her navigate the Oprah interview fallout, the early Archewell press cycle, and her podcast rollout. Their separation, unannounced and unexplained, led industry insiders to speculate that Meghan wanted more control over messaging, and that the firm had grown wary of the mounting controversies. Even in personal circles, distance began to define Meghan's relationships. Serena Williams, once described as one of Meghan's closest confidants, noticeably refrained from promoting archetypes despite appearing as a guest. Oprah Winfrey, whose landmark interview with Meghan and Harry made global headlines, has remained largely silent about the couple ever since. In an industry where silence often speaks louder than words, this lack of public support has not gone unnoticed. One of the most shocking stories to emerge was from Daniel Martin, Meghan's longtime makeup artist and close friend. For years, Martin was considered a staple in Meghan's circle. He did her makeup for the royal wedding and frequently appeared in her orbit. But in a leaked conversation recently revealed by an industry insider, Martin reportedly expressed regret for being drawn into what he described as a carefully orchestrated illusion. He allegedly admitted to being asked to participate in photo ops that were not what they appeared to be, and to being pressured into saying publicly supportive things he privately didn't believe. Martin's words, though not directly confirmed, have echoed through entertainment and fashion circles. They contribute to the growing perception that Meghan's inner circle wasn't just breaking down, it was turning against her. So what caused the collapse of loyalty? One reason is control. Multiple insiders have described Meghan as micromanaging to the extreme. Every statement, appearance, and project had to meet her exacting standards, often to the point of dysfunction. Staff were overworked, decisions reversed, timelines abandoned. People who signed on with excitement eventually left with exhaustion. And those who tried to raise concerns were reportedly iced out or replaced. Another reason is fear. Meghan's reputation for cutting people off, sometimes with no warning or explanation, created an environment of anxiety. Staff and friends alike began watching their words, guarding their actions, and avoiding missteps. When people feel disposable, loyalty turns to self-preservation. There is also the brand factor. Meghan has positioned herself as a champion of compassion and inclusion. But when her team's lived experiences didn't match the public image, resentment festered. One former Archwell associate said it plainly. It felt like we were building a shrine, not a cause. The constant emphasis on image over impact made many feel their work was performative, not meaningful. Perhaps most devastating, however, is the erosion of personal trust. Meghan built her early narrative around being a victim of royal cruelty, of media persecution, of institutional racism. But as time passed and more first-hand accounts contradicted her claims, the people in her circle had to choose between public allegiance and personal integrity. Some stayed silent. Others chose to leave. Now, Meghan and Harry exist in a narrowed echo chamber. The couple, once surrounded by Hollywood's elite and palace gatekeepers alike, now rely on a far smaller team, one dominated by legal advisors and crisis PR specialists. It's no longer about expansion. It's about containment. This implosion of Meghan's inner circle is more than a personnel crisis. It's a symbolic unraveling of the mythology she worked so hard to build. In a world where influence is currency, losing allies means losing power. Every friend who walks away weakens her narrative. Every staffer who leaks a story chips away at the carefully crafted image. And every silent former supporter becomes a liability. As the fallout continues, one thing is clear. Meghan is no longer operating from a position of strength. Her relationships are strained. Her allies are vanishing. And her grip on the narrative is slipping. In the world of fame and royalty, the support system you build is everything. Without it, even the most powerful image will crumble. By the end of 2024, what had once been hailed as the ultimate power move, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's departure from the British royal family, had devolved into something far more complicated and far more humiliating. Their attempt to forge a financially independent, globally respected identity outside the institution had faltered. With crumbling business deals, a failed philanthropic foundation, and a steady stream of allies jumping ship, the couple found themselves increasingly isolated. In the face of growing financial uncertainty, dwindling public sympathy, and a shrinking circle of influence, Meghan reportedly pushed for one final strategy, one she had long resisted. A full-scale, coordinated effort to convince Prince Harry to do the unthinkable. Go back. Not go back as a prodigal son seeking reconciliation. Not go back as a partner offering goodwill. But go back as a strategist, asking for a temporary position within the institution they had spent the last few years publicly attacking. Meghan's alleged order was blunt and unambiguous. Beg King Charles for a role. Any role. A symbolic title. A charitable patronage. A ceremonial duty. just enough to give them a foothold back inside the royal system and, more importantly, back in the public's good graces. Insiders familiar with the situation describe it as nothing short of a desperate maneuver, dubbed internally as Operation Crawlback. It wasn't just about image, it was about survival. Their brand was deteriorating. Archewell had become inert. Their streaming deals were floundering or terminated. Their media allies had gone quiet. Meghan, who once dreamed of being the next Oprah, was now watching her credibility vanish with each new negative headline. She reportedly saw one option left: leverage the institution they once rejected to resurrect their status. For Harry, the move was emotionally excruciating. According to a source close to a former royal aide, Harry had resisted the idea for months. His resentment toward his father and brother ran deep, still raw from the fallout over Spare, the funeral tension with William, and the ongoing standoff with royal advisors. Yet, even he understood the dire nature of their situation. The money was dwindling. The headlines had turned against them. Without new partnerships or content, their empire was sinking. The strategy began with subtle diplomatic feelers. Harry didn't reach out directly at first. That would have been too obvious. Instead, messages were conveyed through intermediaries, former royal staff members who still maintained lines of communication with the firm. The language was careful, almost clinical. Would the palace be open to discussing a short-term working role for Prince Harry in one of the Commonwealth initiatives? Could a conversation be arranged privately between father and son to explore future symbolic collaborations? Could Harry re-engage with military veterans through a royal lens, perhaps in connection with the Invictus Games? The messages were met with silence. Not outright rejection, at least not at first, but stonewalling. King Charles was said to be unimpressed. Aides close to him confirmed he was wary of being used as a reputational ladder. "He sees right through it," said one palace source. "After everything that's been said and done." This sudden outreach didn't read as reconciliation. It read as strategy, as self-preservation. But Meghan was reportedly adamant. Sources within the Montecito circle suggest she was growing increasingly frustrated with Harry's reluctance to push harder. She viewed the royal family not as a personal enemy, but as a necessary utility. A brand engine that could be weaponized to restore their image and attract high-end partnerships. She allegedly told Harry that just one royal event, one public appearance in an official capacity, could reset everything. The Sussexes mapped out potential scenarios. If Harry were granted even a temporary ambassadorial role for the Commonwealth or the environment, it could be used as leverage to rebuild lost partnerships in the United States. Meghan could then piggyback off that association with renewed credibility. Archewell's next project, long stalled due to lack of funding and staffing, could be rebranded as an extension of royal outreach. In private circles, Meghan floated the idea that the royal title still held significant commercial appeal in corporate America. The strategy wasn't just about legacy, it was about capital. But within royal circles, Operation Crawlback was received with suspicion and cynicism. Senior courtiers reportedly warned King Charles not to engage. They argued that inviting Harry back, even temporarily, would validate his criticisms and set a dangerous precedent. More practically, they feared a media circus, one that would distract from the king's own initiatives and the ongoing constitutional discussions surrounding the FUT. The queen consort, Camilla, was allegedly furious. Her relationship with Harry had deteriorated beyond repair, particularly after Harry's memoir described her as a villain and master manipulator. She advised Charles to hold the line and not reward disloyalty. Prince William, still seething over Harry's accusations and his repeated attempts to undermine the family, was firmly opposed. "They made their choice," he reportedly said. "Let them live with it." Yet, despite the backlash, Harry persisted. According to those familiar with the situation, he wrote a personal letter to his father, not a formal request, but a heartfelt appeal. In it, he reportedly acknowledged past tensions, affirmed his desire to serve the public, and expressed interest in contributing to charitable causes under the royal umbrella. He did not apologize for past statements but tried to frame his return as a gesture of unity in turbulent times. The letter, though sincere in tone, was seen by many within the palace as a calculated attempt to re-enter the royal system without accountability. It offered no retraction, no public admission of damage done. More importantly, it lacked humility. It was worded like a pitch, said a court insider, not a reconciliation. Charles, ever the pragmatist, considered the letter carefully. He reportedly consulted with both personal aides and constitutional advisors. Could Harry legally be reintroduced into working royal life without triggering a media firestorm? Could such a role be limited to non-UK affairs to reduce domestic backlash? Could a compromise be made without appearing weak? The answer, ultimately, was no. Charles drafted a response, private, firm, and brief. He thanked Harry for his note but made it clear that the structure of the monarchy had changed permanently. There would be no return, temporary or otherwise, without full reinstatement of royal duties and adherence to the values and responsibilities of the firm. In essence, if Harry wanted back in, he'd have to come all the way back. No half measures. No part-time royal life. This was a non-starter for Meghan. The idea of returning to the UK full-time, subject to royal protocols and tabloid scrutiny, was her worst nightmare. She reportedly told friends the offer was insulting and showed the family hadn't learned a thing. In her mind, the monarchy needed them more than they needed it. But the truth, increasingly obvious to the world, was the reverse. The rejection hit Harry hard. For weeks, he reportedly withdrew from the few remaining public obligations he had. His demeanor, according to friends, was one of bitterness and fatigue. Meghan, sensing the window was closing, tried to salvage the plan. She initiated contact with several British charities and Commonwealth organizations in her own name, hoping to arrange virtual collaborations that could restore a sense of connection to her former Duchess role. Most of those organizations declined to participate. The final blow came when leaked details of the strategy made their way into the British press. Prince Harry begs King Charles for royal role, screamed the headlines. Tabloids and serious outlets alike pounced. Columnists mocked the couple's hypocrisy. Former royal commentators called it a humiliation. Overnight, Operation Crawlback transformed from a quiet diplomatic effort into a public relations disaster. For Harry and Meghan, the exposure was devastating. What was supposed to be a strategic re-entry into royal life was now being viewed as an embarrassing climb down. Meghan, in particular, came under fire for allegedly using her husband's family ties to secure relevance and income. Critics called it cynical, opportunistic, and transparent. Back in Montecito, damage control resumed. Public statements were carefully crafted to downplay the outreach. Allies were activated to spin the narrative as one of reconciliation rather than desperation. But the damage had already been done. Operation Crawlback failed not only because the monarchy rejected it, but because it revealed a deeper truth. Despite all their rhetoric, all their claims of freedom and reinvention, Harry and Meghan still needed the monarchy. They needed its prestige, its legacy, its machinery. Without it, they were adrift, two ex-royals struggling to maintain relevance in a world that was quickly moving on. For much of his life, Prince Harry was perceived as the freer spirit of the royal fold, the mischievous younger brother who carried the weight of grief in his eyes but offset it with charisma, rebellion, and relatability. He was the soldier prince, the lad who dressed inappropriately at costume parties yet later led veterans through recovery with uncommon empathy. He was Diana's boy, always compared to his more buttoned-up brother, William. And for that, the world often gave him grace.